I never thought there'd come a day when I'd sit in a brightly lit auditorium, watching someone else stand on stage and tell the story of my life, only with a different name. I still remember the moment the spotlight hit Evan Pierce. His face glowed on the giant LED screen at the Future Mind Expo. He wore a light gray suit, voice smooth and steady through the mic, rehearsed to perfection. He spoke about pioneering technology that could predict human behavior using artificial intelligence, and the crowd below nodded in awe as if witnessing a prophet reinvent the wheel. I sat in the fourth row, clutching a cold cup of coffee, listening to my heartbeat between bursts of applause. Then the screen behind him switched slides, and a series of code lines appeared. My vision blurred for a second, but I recognized it instantly. It was mine. Every line, every semicolon, every comment I had written on a foggy morning 6 years ago in a cramped apartment with a dying laptop. There was even one note I had added half jokingly: "May this loop never end, LT." The initials, LT, my name, were gone. In their place, proprietary technology, Neuroloop Labs. He called it the company's intellectual property, as if that sleepless night I spent debugging it out of existence had never happened. I still remember Evan asking me back then how to make the algorithm learn faster without crashing. I showed him, patiently, like a teacher guiding a slow student. And now that same student was on stage, preaching my lesson like it was his divine revelation. He told the audience about the sleepless night when the idea was born. I almost laughed. That so called sleepless night, he was snoring on his desk while I stayed up fixing system errors until sunrise. I listened to his laugh echo through the hall, the same confident laugh I once found charming, now creaking like an old chair in a forgotten meeting room. A man sitting beside me leaned in and whispered, "That guy's a genius. Not everyone can build something like that." I did not answer. I just nodded, because in that moment, I realized something bitterly true. People do not need to kill you to erase you. They just need to delete your name from the code. I remembered the smell of that first room where we started Neuroloop Labs, the mix of coffee and melting plastic from circuit boards. There were 5 of us then: Evan, 3 others, huddled around a round wooden table, dreaming of a deep learning system that could predict user behavior in real time. Back then, I thought I had found my second family. I believed in them, believed that if I worked hard enough, fairness would follow. When Evan finished his talk, the lights came on and applause thundered through the room. He bowed, stepped down from the stage, and looked around with a smug smile. His eyes swept across the audience. They passed over me without a flicker of recognition. 6 years of working side by side, hundreds of sleepless nights, and now he did not even see me. I stood up and walked out amid the echoing applause. The hallway outside was cool, filled with the faint scent of cheap perfume. On the giant screen by the exit, Evan's presentation replayed in a loop. His voice filled the air, smooth and confident. "We believe this is the next great leap in artificial intelligence." "We," I repeated silently, with a thin smile. 6 years of cracked hands typing through endless nights, and now it was we. He said we as if someone else had stayed up with me through 3 winters, as if someone else had cried over a bug that would not fix, or laughed alone when the algorithm finally ran clean. I walked past the cafe in the lobby, ordered an iced black coffee, set it on the table, and sat down. The wall screen showed Evan shaking hands with the chief executive officer of a major conglomerate. I stared at the image, half amused, half hollow. Truth is, I was not angry, not yet. I just felt empty, like someone had stolen my breath without even touching me. Maybe that is how justice dies, not with an explosion, but with applause. I took a sip of coffee, bitter, cold. Through the glass, I saw Evan still smiling for the cameras, while Chief Executive Officer Clara Dane stood beside him, eyes sharp and gleaming, like someone who had just sold another piece of her soul. I set the cup down and watched the last swirl of foam spiral inside. Then I whispered to myself quietly, almost like a vow, "Fine. If they can erase my name from the code, I will make them rewrite the entire system." I stood up and walked away. No one noticed. No one knew that the woman leaving the room in silence was the one who had written the very lines of code they were applauding. But I knew. And one day, they would too. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass roof, sounding like slow keystrokes. I stood there watching the city lights shimmer on the wet pavement, thinking about the 6 years I had lost and the game that had just begun. Have you ever watched someone retell your own work and claim it as theirs? It does not roar, it hums quietly, like a line of code erased without warning. I do not know where you are listening from, but if you have ever been overlooked, you will understand me. Tell me where you are tuning in from. Leave a comment below. And if you like stories of calm, calculated revenge, justice served cold but precise, do not forget to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. I left the auditorium that day, but the applause kept echoing in my head for days after. There are sounds you cannot turn off, especially when they play over the moment you realize a lifetime of work has been draped over someone else like a new coat. I went back to my small apartment on South Congress, a place barely big enough for a desk, two monitors, and a stack of old coffee cups. On the wall, the first Neuraloop poster still hung, slanted letters reading, "We build the future." Back then, I really believed it. 6 years earlier, I was 23, too green to know that we in the startup world rarely mean all of us. I remember my first interview with Evan and Clara. The office was just the second floor of a renovated warehouse, the walls still smelling of fresh paint. Evan sat on the desk, legs swinging, a cold coffee in his hand. He asked me about the deep learning algorithm I had tested at a hackathon. I talked straight through, forgetting I was speaking to someone who could hire me. He listened, nodded over and over, eyes lighting up as if he had found treasure. When I stopped, he said, "You are not just smart. You think like a machine." At the time, I felt proud. Now I see that was probably the worst compliment I ever received. They hired me at Neuraloop the next week. There were 5 of us: me, Evan, a data scientist, a hardware engineer, and Clara, the founder. Clara was the kind of woman who could walk into a meeting and change the air. Her voice was soft but heavy, her gaze cold and sharp. She said if we succeed, I would be the lifeblood of the project. I believed every word. For the first 3 months, I worked like a mad person, 14 hours a day, no weekends. I wrote tens of thousands of lines of code for the behavior prediction system, an algorithm that could read simulated neural signals from user behavior data and optimize its responses automatically. The first time I ran a test and saw accuracy past 95%, I cried in front of the screen. Evan hugged me and said, "You just changed the industry." I believed him. Neuraloop grew. We moved offices, found investors, and got press. At every press conference, I sat in the back, watching Evan say, "We achieved this. We created that breakthrough." Each time I told myself to stay calm, fairness will come to those who wait. I thought if I worked harder, they would notice. Then one day, I got an email inviting me to the Startup Innovator of the Year awards. Neuraloop images were everywhere, but none showed me. The article called Evan the Mind Behind the Deep Learning Breakthrough. Clara was hailed as the visionary connecting technology and humanity. I was in a small line in the engineering team section. No name, no thanks. That night, I opened the old code at home. The lines still ran smoothly like breath. I cried not from sadness, but because I understood fairness would not arrive on its own. It had to be taken. From then on, I saw things more clearly. Evan was not the passionate colleague I had admired, but someone who used a smile to take other people's ideas. He started showing up late to meetings and rephrasing what I had just presented, changing a few words to make it sound visionary. Once I wrote a 17-page report, he edited 3 paragraphs and put his name on the top. Clara was different. She never directly stole credit. She let things unfold naturally. She called it a focused communication strategy, which meant only a few faces would be presented to the public. I was not one of them, and I slowly understood I would never be. Still, I kept working, like someone following a mirage. Neuraloop grew so fast that I had no time to think about anything else. I worked until exhaustion, slept for 4 hours, and went back to the office. My world was code and performance reports. One day, Clara told me, "Lena, if we go public, you will be part of history." I smiled, not knowing that history would be rewritten without my name. In the later years, when Neuraloop began to attract interest from big corporations, things changed. Meetings became private, and access to systems tightened. I stopped being invited to strategy meetings. One morning, I logged into the internal data repository and found my account had been downgraded. Evan said it was just security restructuring. I knew restructuring meant they did not want me to see something. I was right. A week later, while I was accidentally reading a technical report sent to investors, I saw my algorithm had been renamed. They called it EV Core, short for Evan Pierce algorithm. No more LTM framework, like it had been before. 3 letters were enough for me to understand that 6 years of my life had officially been erased. I sat in an empty conference room with the screen's blue light reflecting on my face. Maybe I should have yelled, thrown something, or made a scene. Instead, I felt an eerie calm. Anger is wasted energy. I had a far more effective weapon: knowledge. I closed the laptop and looked out at the rain falling over Austin. One thought kept running through my head. If they can use my code to build their empire, I can use that very code to take apart everything they think is untouchable. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The whole floor was still quiet, filled only with the hum of the air conditioner and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I sat down, powered up my laptop, and watched the lines of code flicker across the screen as if they were alive. 6 years. 6 years of working like a machine, forgetting to eat, to sleep, even to celebrate my own birthday. And in the end, they erased me with nothing more than a new name. I do not know what made me walk into Evan's office that day. Maybe I wanted to see if I still had any value left. Maybe I still believed that, after everything, he would understand. His office was at the corner of the floor, with glass walls looking out over downtown Austin. He always said a clear view kept his mind sharp. I suppose that is why he never looked down to see the people working beneath him. He was on the phone when I knocked. One hand held a cup of coffee, the other motioned for me to wait. I stood there listening to him laugh, the kind of smooth laugh of someone who had just closed a deal. When he finally hung up, the smile stayed on his face. "Lena, long time no see. What brings you here? Something exciting?" The way he said exciting almost made me laugh. I sat down across from him and looked straight into his eyes. "I want to talk about my salary." He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head, a move I had seen too many times from people so sure of their own importance they forgot they were human. "About your salary? I thought we settled that already." "Settled for you, maybe," I said. "But I just reviewed the HR expense report. My pay is less than half of a new engineer's, someone who has never even touched the core code." Evan looked at me, his smile fading into that familiar expression. The look of someone about to give you a lesson they think you need. "Lena, I know you are talented. No one denies that. But you see, at my level, value is not just about code. It is about leadership, about vision, about bringing technology to the market." "I understand," I said calmly. "But that technology, I created it." He nodded slowly, like a teacher pitying a child who still does not understand the game. "I know, and I appreciate that. But sometimes the best are not the most important. Do not take it the wrong way. I just want you to focus on what you do best, the technical side. Leave the business side to me." His tone was light as air, but I could hear the faint echo of condescension. I looked straight at him. "I am not asking for charity, Evan. I am asking to be paid what I am worth." He laughed. Not the kind of laugh that warms a room, but the kind that comes from someone who thinks they are above you. He leaned forward, tilting his head like he was watching a comedy. "Paid what you are worth? Lena, this company does not revolve around one person. You are thinking too highly of yourself." I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only answer that matters. He took a sip of coffee, his voice softening into fake sympathy. "Look, I do not want you to feel undervalued. I will reconsider things once we go public. Everyone will benefit then." IPO. I had heard that word too many times. It was like a golden ticket they waved around to keep you working in hell. I stood up, gathered the papers I brought. "Thank you for your time. Do not be so serious," he said as I turned to leave. "You know, in your role as an engineer, you could make a lifetime career out of just doing what you do best." Stay in your lane, Lena. That sentence made me stop. I turned around and smiled, the kind of smile he mistook for humility, but was actually the end of something. You are right, I said. I will stay in my lane. But you forget one thing. I am the one who drew that lane. I left the office, the sound of the glass door closing behind me, soft as a trap snapping shut. I did not feel angry. Something inside me had simply broken, part trust, part innocence. And what rose in its place was sharper, colder, and quieter as a laser cut. As I walked past the workstations, I looked at my colleagues still hunched over their screens, the blue light reflecting off their tired faces. I wondered if any of them realized we were not building the future. We were being swallowed by it. That night, I sat in my apartment, opened my laptop. My code still ran, loyal and flawless, unaware that its creator had just been betrayed. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled. I was no longer angry. I just saw things clearly now. This game was not over, and next time, I would be the one writing the rules. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the pale blue glow of my screen, listening to the rain outside the window. The feeling was bitter and clear at the same time. 6 years of my life poured into Neuroloop, only to be cut out of the very world I had built. I did not cry. I did not rage. I just opened old folders, old project files, like flipping through a diary written in code. When I reached the folder named LTM Framework, I found a file called Draft Patent Prototype. I did not even remember saving it. When I opened it, I saw the provisional patent application I had filed 6 years ago, just a few weeks after finishing the first version of the algorithm. Back then, I had no idea where the company would go, so I filed it as a precaution to protect the idea. I still remember what I wrote: Lena M. Torres with my personal email address, not the company one. I read carefully. The technical description matched exactly with the core algorithm now running inside their EVA core product. I froze. They might have erased my name from the code, but they could not erase it from the patent record. That piece of paper, useless for 6 years, was now the one thing they could never touch. I went through my old emails, searching for messages from my former lawyer, an old man named Harold Key, who had helped me file the application cheaply. I remembered him saying, "Keep everything under your name. Never let them hold all the rights. Technology is a double-edged knife. Whoever holds the handle survives." Back then, I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. Now I understand. I took out my phone and called his number, surprised when he still remembered me. His voice was rough and slow. "I am guessing this is not a social call, is it?" I told him briefly about Evan and Neuroloop. He chuckled softly, then asked, "Do you still have the original copy?" "I have both the original and the filing confirmation," I said. "But I do not want to sue them. I want them to face what they have done." He paused for a long moment. "Good. But if you are planning something, be careful. They have money, lawyers, and reasons to crush you if you act recklessly." "I am not going to act recklessly," I said. "I am going to act intelligently." After hanging up, I reopened all the technical documentation from Neuroloop. I knew that a patent alone was not enough. I needed proof, something they could not deny, and I knew exactly where to find it. The next morning, I arrived at the office as usual. Evan was not there. He was meeting with investors. I went to my workstation, turned on the computer, and opened the internal system. I knew it better than anyone because I had built it. If they thought revoking my access would keep me out, they had forgotten who wrote the access control code in the first place. I traced through the old logs, downloading every execution record of the core algorithm. Every run left a trail: time, data source, initiator. Each log carried my technical signature, a mechanisms had created to monitor performance. What they did not know was that each line also contained a hidden identifier, a kind of digital fingerprint that only I could decode. I saved everything. The data was so heavy that the computer nearly froze. When I looked at the number in the corner of the screen, 214,000 executions in 6 years, I knew exactly what I was holding: proof that their entire product existed because of my code. By late afternoon, I was still in front of the screen, eyes locked on the endless stream of files downloading. Outside, people walked and laughed. unaware that in a few weeks, the company they trusted their future to would be shaking from the inside. When the clock neared 8, only a few lights remained on in the building. I opened a new file and named it mirrorplan.txt. Inside, I wrote, Objective: reclaim ownership through evidence. Method: do not destroy, only reflect. I knew I would not sue. I would not need a courtroom. I just needed them to realize that everything they were showing off belonged to me, and that I could pull it back at any moment. That night, I opened the window and looked out at the city lights spread like a maze. I thought of Evan, in his tailored suit and his smug smile, convinced he controlled everything. I thought of Clara, always talking about the human side of technology, yet never treating anyone like a real human being. And then I thought of myself, the engineer who once believed fairness would come on its own, now realizing that sometimes, to reclaim what was stolen, you have to become the shadow inside the system you built. I closed the laptop. The game had just begun. I began putting the plan into motion a few days later. Everything had to be quiet and natural, as if I were only doing my ordinary work. No one suspected anything because at Neuroloop, no one understood the system as deeply as I did. They depended on me more than they imagined. I sat at my screen and wrote a new module, a small package called Performance Monitor. On paper, it was just a monitoring tool to help the engineering team track resource allocation in real time. But inside it, I hid something else: Mirror Loop. Mirror Loop was not a virus. It did not destroy or steal data. It simply reflected the system itself. Each time the core algorithm ran, it sent a signal to my private server, recording a timestamp and execution parameters. A legitimate technical copy, disguised as a routine update. I spent 1 week rewriting every line so no one would notice. Every function and every comment looked sensible. When it was done, I emailed the development team. GUI team, I have finished the new monitoring module. It will help us track resource allocation and detect bottlenecks early. I recommend integrating it into the next update. 2 hours later, Evan replied in his familiar tone, Great work, Lena. This is exactly what we need. Add it to the next build. That curt response made me laugh. He had just signed a perfect audio recording for himself. When the update rolled out, Mirror Loop began to work. Each time a user ran the program, each time their server called the core algorithm, a tiny ping went back to my server. The little ticks on the console felt like a heartbeat. I called it a heartbeat. After 1 month, I had hundreds of thousands of records. I knew exactly where my technology ran, how many times a day, and on how many devices. I even learned who Neuroloop's biggest customers were, information they had never shared with me before. The more I collected, the clearer the scale of what I had built became. EVA Core, or rather LTM framework, powered the company's entire data infrastructure and accounted for 82% of recurring revenue. They lived off what I had written, and they did not know that every beat of the system was being logged by the person they had removed. But I also knew I was walking a tightrope. If discovered, I could be charged with internal intrusion. Even though I was only accessing code I had created, I had to be careful. I hid Mirror Loop deeper, encoded the packets, and randomized the ping rhythm to avoid suspicion. One afternoon, while checking logs, I saw a small alert on the internal dashboard. Anomaly detected. External callback delay. My heart raced. Evan could detect this if he dug deeper. I opened the console and patched a temporary fix to mask the signal. A little while later, Evan walked into the shared workspace carrying his laptop with a slightly annoyed look. Is something wrong with the system today? I saw the server was responding slowly. I looked up calmly. Nothing serious. Probably the new monitor is sending a few too many requests. He raised an eyebrow and laughed. I guess you coded something more complicated than necessary again. Maybe, I replied, but complexity is often what keeps things from collapsing. He laughed loudly, clapped my shoulder, and left. When the door closed, I sat still until my pulse settled. A minute later, stable connection appeared on the console. I exhaled, relieved. That night, I opened the downloaded data. Every line, parameter, and signal was evidence. I was about to have everything I needed to prove they had used my technology without permission. I saved it all to a separate hard drive and hid it in the kitchen cabinet under the sink, among old utensils. No one would look there. I put my hand on the drawer, felt metal click softly, and a cold shiver ran across my skin. When I looked up, my reflection in the window stared back. I no longer saw the young engineer who believed in fairness. I saw someone who knew the system, who knew how to break it with a single keystroke. I did not want to destroy. I wanted justice, but if no one gives you justice, you write it into the code yourself. And I had already started writing. The next morning, the air in the office felt heavy. News of the small delay Evan mentioned the day before had reached the executive floor. I knew they would not let it slide. In the startup world, even the smallest glitch can be turned into a storm. Evan showed up in a wrinkled shirt, eyes dark from a sleepless night. The confident smile he used to wear was gone, replaced by the stiffness of a man trying to hide worry. I saw him pass my desk, pause to glance at my screen, then move on like an explorer leaving a cave that made an unfamiliar sound. An emergency meeting was called. Clara entered like a cold gust of wind, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and the composure of someone who had seen every kind of disaster. She sat down, opened her laptop, eyes scanned through slides of revenue charts and IPO projections. "We cannot let this minor issue shake investor confidence," she said. Her voice was soft but sharp, like a blade slicing through paper. Evan reported, "We noticed some alerts about external callbacks. There are unusual requests from an unidentified endpoint." Clara frowned. "So someone is tampering with the system?" Evan cleared his throat, glancing around. "It could be a configuration bug, or maybe someone inside triggered it accidentally, or maybe someone is trying to exploit it." He said someone like him wanted to point a finger but did not dare. In my head, everything moved in slow motion. They were searching for an external threat while the real culprit sat among them, wearing a neutral sweater and a calm smile. I did not react. Sometimes what is obvious is the most dangerous thing to reveal. In his unease, Evans suggested hiring an external cybersecurity team to audit the system. Clara nodded. "Do not cut corners now," she said. "Even a tiny crack could ruin the game before the initial public offering." A few hours later, two men in tailored jackets entered the office, white hat specialists with the air of hunters. Their eyes were cold, their equipment gleamed like weapons. They got to work. I played the perfect collaborator, providing logs, explaining workflows, and pointing to key modules, all logical and harmless. They dug deep, scanned endpoints, analyzed traffic, hunted for anomalies. Every question they asked felt like a needle in my lungs, but I answered each one precisely, like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Meanwhile, Clara moved on another front, controlling the narrative. She called the communications team and ordered a soft press release reaffirming product stability and leadership professionalism. "We need to calm the waters," she repeated. "Do not let investors panic." She knew how to mask fear with poise. The first news headline appeared like a ripple in water. "Neuraloop confirms minor system issue, investigation ongoing." The tone was reassuring and even flattering, and tech blogs praised the company's swift and transparent response. But beneath that calm surface, suspicion began to circulate inside the boardroom. Every employee and every account now under quiet scrutiny. The explosion came that afternoon when a tech blog posted an article hinting at an internal engineer with suspicious activity. No name, just enough to ignite speculation. Comments flooded in. Was someone trying to sabotage the company before its public listing? The discussion quickly drifted from code to character. A few days later came the harassment, threatening emails, and anonymous comments. One message read, "If you mess with the market, you will become the example." A former colleague sent me a screenshot captioned, "Unstable Genius," a label thrown at people too smart to be trusted. They painted me as the unstable one, the saboteur. Instead of fear, I felt cold clarity. Their tactic was classic. Destroy your credibility first, so when you show proof, you look insane. I had heard of this playbook, now I was living it. While the media noise rose and fell, I stayed silent. Mirror Loop kept recording. Heartbeat after heartbeat. I knew evidence only mattered when verified by an independent authority, one that could not be twisted by rumor. So I reached out to the Digital Ethics Foundation, a nonprofit specializing in data ethics and creative rights. They were not lawyers. They were worse news for liars. They carried public weight and the power of technical validation. In my first email, I kept it brief. I have proof of unauthorized use of an algorithm I developed. I need independent verification before disclosure. They replied faster than expected, arranging a private meeting with their legal and technical experts. They advised against releasing raw data. Instead, they would compile a certified technical dossier that could stand on its own. While I waited, Clara made her move. She called the head of human resources and ordered a silence buyout package, $5 million for any employee tied to the incident, in exchange for a non disclosure agreement. Clara's voice was calm and cold. "It is efficient and clean," she said. Then Evan called. His voice trembled slightly. "Lena, can we talk in private?" I could hear the split in him, guilt clashing with fear. He could not admit the truth, but he could not stay out of it either. I said, "No need. Everything will be clear soon." Then I hung up. From the outside, it looked chaotic. Headlines, accusations, veiled threats. But inside, another plan was forming. Together with the Digital Ethics Foundation, I assembled everything: timestamps, technical signatures, patent filings. The pattern was undeniable. This was not a random error. It was a chain of deliberate decisions by leadership. One night, as I held the drive containing every heartbeat and watched the numbers climb, a strange calm filled me. It was not a triumph. It was a restoration. Not wealth or revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of truth returning to its rightful place. And truth, once backed by proof, is the one thing that makes liars tremble. 2 weeks later, I received an internal email with an empty subject line and a single message inside. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, conference room, 18th floor. The sender was Clara Dane. No greeting, no invitation, just an order. I knew what was coming. The Digital Ethics Foundation had completed its technical report and, following professional ethics, sent a summary to NeuroLoop for review. That document, I was certain, had landed directly on Clara's desk. The 18th floor conference room was the kind of place no one entered without being summoned. Thick glass doors, soundproofed walls, the smell of leather chairs, and the cold air from the vents gave it the atmosphere of an unspoken courtroom. When I walked in, Clara was already seated. Evan was there too, staring at the table like a child caught stealing. "Sit down," Clara said. Her voice did not need to be loud. One low tone was enough to make your back straighten. I pulled out a chair across from them and stayed silent. The white light reflected off the polished table like a mirror. I could see 3 faces in it: one cold, one uneasy, and one terrifyingly calm. "Lena," Clara began, "I think we all know why you are here." "I think so," I replied. She clasped her hands together, studying me like a doctor assessing a difficult patient. "You are intelligent, very intelligent. But sometimes being too intelligent is a problem." "I do not think so," I said. "The problem starts when intelligent people use someone else's mind to make money." Evan shifted slightly, but Clara raised her hand to stop him. "You are playing with fire, Lena. I am not saying you are wrong. Maybe that piece of code truly is yours. But you know very well that everything belongs to the company once you sign your contract. You have no ground to stand above us." I met her eyes. "I have one thing: a patent filed before that contract ever existed. And now I have proof." She fell silent. I saw Evan's eyes widen as if he had just realized the storm he was in was bigger than he imagined. Clara stayed composed, but her ringed hand began tapping on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound was a countdown. Then she said, "I do not like threats, but I believe in deals. $5 million, a lifetime non-disclosure agreement, and an honorary Chief Technology Officer title on the IPO record. You have 24 hours to decide. Otherwise," she lifted her gaze, "we will make this story unbelievable. And when that happens, no one will be able to save you." I looked at her for a long time. No anger, no fear, just the old exhaustion of someone who once believed fairness could be negotiated with people who never believed in it. "I do not want money," I said slowly. "I want the truth." She laughed softly, like crystal glasses touching. "Truth does not feed anyone, Lena. especially not in this world. I stood. You are wrong. Truth survives precisely because no one pays it. It does not need a salary. I turned to leave. Evan tried to speak, but Clara motioned for silence. When I reached the door, she called after me. You think you have won? This company will not collapse because of one engineer with hurt pride. I stopped and looked at her reflection in the glass. No, you are right. It will not collapse because of me. It will collapse because of how you built it, on things that were never yours. Then I walked out, leaving behind the frozen air and Clara's venomous stare. I did not go home. I went straight to the Digital Ethics Foundation, where their team had the final report ready. Nearly 100 pages proving the entire EVA core product was built on the LTM framework, complete with logs, timestamps, and verified records. I signed the authorization for them to release it publicly the next morning. On the way back, the city glowed against the river. The glass towers reflected off the surface of the Colorado like endless streams of data. I thought of Evan, probably trying to convince Clara that I was reckless, unstable. But deep down, he knew what I had done was not reckless. It was a final update, precise and deliberate. Only this time, the patch was not meant to fix the system, but to expose it. I reached home near midnight. I opened my laptop and logged into my private server. Mirror Loop was still running, but I shut it down. No more heartbeats were needed. The monster's heart had stopped. The next morning at 8, the Digital Ethics Foundation released the report. The news spread like lightning. Every major tech outlet carried the headline, Neuraloop accused of intellectual property theft. At the same time, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation. I sat still, watching the headlines scroll across my screen. No joy, no vindication, just silence. After 6 years, I had finally made them hear what they once mocked. That afternoon, Evan sent one message. Lena, I am sorry. I never thought it would go this far. I read it, then deleted it. An apology has no weight when it arrives after everything has fallen. Clara never wrote, but I knew she was already crafting her next move because people like her never stop fighting. And if I was right, the next chapter would not be peaceful. The news spread like wildfire through Silicon Valley. Less than 24 hours after the Digital Ethics Foundation released its report, Neuraloop went from rising star to cautionary tale of tech arrogance. Financial networks ran the story nonstop, while tech blogs dissected every line of code in the public documents, pointing out the near-perfect match between EVA Core and LTM framework. Every string of code they once called groundbreaking had become evidence against them. That morning, I stepped out of my apartment into the Texas sunlight, but in my mind I still saw Clara, the woman who had always known how to control every situation. And this time, she had nothing left to hold on to. In just 2 days, Neuraloop's stock dropped 18%. The largest investor announced a withdrawal, citing unresolved legal risks. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation. Internal memos leaked, emails surfaced, one of them showing Clara's direct order to continue using the algorithm, despite the intellectual property warning. That afternoon, her face appeared on CNBC, paler than usual, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. We will fully cooperate with the investigation and protect the company's reputation, she said. Reputation. The word echoed in my head, hollow and familiar. She once told me, a company only exists as long as its reputation does. And now she stood in the storm she created. Evan disappeared from social media. A friend from the engineering team messaged me that he had been indefinitely suspended. Rumor had it that the morning the news broke, he smashed his laptop screen and walked out without a word. I did not feel joy hearing it. A part of me, the part that remembered the early nights running code together, drinking silent coffee, felt a sting of pity. But truth does not pick sides. 3 days later, I received an anonymous email. Only a few lines. They are really falling. Clara has been stripped of authority. Evan is gone. They want to settle. If you still want, they are ready to negotiate. I read it, then closed it. Negotiate was the word they always used when power began to slip away. I did not need negotiation. The truth had spoken for me. That evening, I sat in a small cafe, watching people pass by, listening to the TV report on the biggest ethics scandal in technology this year. When the anchor read the name Lena M. Torres, it felt like hearing someone call me from another lifetime. There was no triumph, only a strange calm, as if I had just cleaned a dusty room, opened a window, and let the air in. Later that night, another email arrived, this time from Evan. Long, careful, almost remorseful. He wrote that he never meant to steal, that things got out of control, and that he always saw me as the true co-founder. At the end, one line: "If I could go back, I would have you stand beside me on that stage, not in the audience." I read it again and again. No anger, no forgiveness. Only regret for the man who once had the chance to understand me, but chose the easier path instead. On the fifth day after the report, Neuraloop's board released an official statement. Chief Executive Officer Clara Dane resigned for personal reasons. That was the polite way of saying they cut her throat. The media called it a systemic collapse, but I knew better. Systems do not collapse on their own. They collapse when people start believing they are above the rules. Evan, meanwhile, posted a single update on LinkedIn. Sometimes you only realize who really wrote the story once everything has burned. The post went viral. I said nothing. I did not need to. I spent the weekend cleaning my apartment. For years, I had lived like a guest in my own life. Dishes piled up, walls covered in sticky notes of code. I gathered everything, erased it all, and kept only one thing: the printed copy of my first patent filing, edges yellowed, the words, "Filed by Lena M. Torres," faint, but still there. By Monday, I got a call from a journalist at TechNode. They wanted to interview me for a piece titled "The Woman Behind the Biggest AI Ethics Scandal of the Year." I hesitated, then agreed, with one condition: no makeup, no staging, no retouching. The shoot took place in an empty room, a whiteboard behind me covered with simple formulas. When the photographer asked me to smile, I said, "No need. I do not want them to remember my smile. I want them to remember the truth." A week later, the article went live. The engineer they tried to erase. The cover showed me without makeup, without a smile, just a woman standing among equations, eyes steady, calm, without hatred. That day, Neuraloop's stock fell another 12%. Investors demanded an indefinite suspension of the IPO. Several major clients migrated to other platforms. The people who once smiled at me in cafes now looked away on the street. Evan sent one last message: "I am leaving Austin. Maybe you were right. Some things are not meant to be built on sand." I did not reply, partly because there was no need, partly because silence was the clearest answer. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city's reflection in the glass. I thought of it all: the sleepless nights, the condescension, the smirks in meeting rooms, and the moment I finally stood up and said enough. I did not feel vengeance, not even victory, just a quiet peace, as if after 6 years I had finally cleared the ashes around me. But deep down, I knew the story was not over. Somewhere out there are people like me, people writing code in silence, still believing fairness will arrive on its own. All I did was open the first door for them, and beyond that door waits an entirely new chapter. After everything, I did not return to technology with noisy meetings or contracts that stretched for dozens of pages. I came back in silence, the kind only those who have walked through a storm know how to value. A month after Neuraloop collapsed, I was still living in my small apartment on South Congress. Every morning, I made black coffee, opened in my laptop, and wrote. Not for money, not for recognition, but because I wanted to try one more time, the right way. I named the new project Human Loop, not for revenge, but to complete what was missing: humanity. If Neuraloop once sought to turn people into data, Human Loop would do the opposite. It would turn data into something that serves people. I did not start a company, nor did not seek funding. I just created a public repository on GitHub and uploaded the first lines of code. The description was simple: artificial intelligence should learn to understand, not to possess. At first, there were only a few dozen followers, then a few hundred. then thousands. Within 72 hours, Human Loop became the most downloaded open source project of the week. Engineers from everywhere began sending pull requests, suggesting improvements, and sharing the philosophy of AI for people. A university in California sent an email asking if they could include the project in their curriculum. I agreed, with no conditions. Every night, when the city sank into stillness, I sat alone before the screen, typing line after line, feeling as if I had come home. I no longer felt tense or afraid of being stolen from. Everything was transparent now. Everyone could see. Everyone could contribute. The beauty of transparency is that no one can hide their shadow inside it. One morning, I received a message from someone named Brett, a former engineer at Neuraloop, one of those fired in the first round of cuts. He wrote, "Lena, I just saw the Human Loop project. It's strange. This is exactly what we once talked about in that old meeting room. I'm sorry for not speaking up then. Thank you for not giving up." I read that message over and over. For the first time in years, I smiled sincerely. Not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who has touched a piece of humanity in the cold world of algorithms. In the days that followed, I received hundreds of emails. Some told me they had their work stolen. Some said my story gave them the courage to file patents under their own names, instead of hiding behind their companies. A young woman programmer from India wrote, "I cried when you said, 'The truth doesn't need a paycheck.' I realized what I was doing was more than rewriting code. I was rewriting how people saw fairness." One evening, as I reviewed pull requests, I noticed a familiar username, E. Pierce. No avatar, no description. He had submitted a small patch, an optimization for a piece of code I had written imperfectly. No message, only a short commit note. For the right reason this time. I did not delete it. I merged it. Because forgiveness sometimes matters, not for them, but for yourself. That summer, Human Loop was mentioned at a major AI conference in Berlin. One presentation, titled "The Return of Ownership," quoted a note I had written years ago. Every algorithm reflects its creator. If we are not honest, neither will technology be. People began calling me a new symbol of ethics in tech. I did not care. I never wanted to be a symbol. I only wanted to be someone who could write her code again without having her name erased. Now, every morning I still make coffee, open my computer, and read messages from the community. Life is calm, but deep inside, I know I have changed. I am no longer the young engineer who once believed fairness would come naturally. I understand now that fairness is not born on its own. It is built, line by line, by people brave enough not to stay silent. One day I was invited to speak at Stanford University. I stood on stage, looking out at hundreds of students listening intently. One of them asked, "Do you regret it? Destroying a company just to reclaim a patent?" I smiled. No, I did not destroy them. They collapsed when I stopped holding them up. The auditorium went silent. Then came a long round of applause. I looked around and realized I was no longer afraid of the spotlight. 6 years ago, I sat in the audience watching someone else tell my story. Today, I was telling it myself, in my own voice. When the talk ended, I stepped outside and stood beneath the trees by the lecture hall. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and memory. I looked up at the clear sky and thought about everything: the sleepless nights, the laughter when I asked for a raise, the way they all disappeared like erased lines of code. I took out my phone, opened a note, and typed the final line of my personal record. If the world once tried to teach me silence, then now I will teach it how to listen. I saved it, closed the phone, and walked into the crowd. No one recognized me, and that made me feel free. I do not need to be known. I only need to be remembered correctly. Which moment in this story moved you the most? Was it when the young engineer sat alone in the dark, mocked for asking for a raise, or when she stood up and rewrote justice in her own code? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And finally, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will not miss the stories where justice is served in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for listening.